again, make yourself comfortable, save your knees for later. We'll finish with a meditation later on. Okay, so in the first half I was talking about these first two great stages of spiritual life. I never liked that word spiritual. It always sounds like it's some sort of weird, floppy, flaky thing that some people might be into or not. Really, spiritual just means your human life, your genuinely human life. Yeah? To live a genuinely human life, you need to take responsibility for your mind. Easier said than done. You need to take ownership of your mind so that you can be the agent of your life rather than the victim of your life. And then you need to, when I say you, I mean me, I mean all of us. You need to give. I need to give. And keep giving. And giving is really an expression of awareness of others. What people most need from us is our awareness. Sometimes you can't help somebody else very much, even though you'd like to, but you can always be aware of them. You know, that some people, I don't know, there's something slightly almost mystical, I think, about that. Do you notice if somebody says ask you how you are, really depends who it is that's asking. Sometimes you just find yourself being able to talk, and you can say, you talk how you are, and you feel close to them. I don't know whether you've experienced, with some people you just almost can't speak because they clearly aren't interested. I used to have this lovely old friend of mine who loved to talk about himself at great length. And at the end of it, he'd say, "Anyway, how are you?" And what I thought was interesting about it was actually almost in the old days. At first, I used to actually try and answer that question because I took it literally, whereas it just meant we're closing now, aren't we? It's actually quite a different thing. So I used to try and sort of stammer out an answer, but what I found interesting is that it was literally hard to talk. It was literally hard to answer because it quite clearly didn't mean it. It's almost as if you pick things up very deeply that someone doesn't really mean it, so you can't really speak. And what's also interesting, I find, that if somebody is aware of you, even in a quite an ordinary way, you find that you can really speak, and it's really slightly magical. I went for a walk with someone the other day, and they just said, "How are you?" and I just could speak. No, that doesn't sound so surprising. What's he going on about? Anyway, surely you've had that experience. If someone's aware of you and interested in you, sometimes you can find yourself saying much more than you'd meant to say. If someone isn't aware of you and isn't interested in you, you've got nothing to say about yourself, unless you're given to talking. But so on the basis of this kind of, first of all, taking ownership of our lives and then giving, and from the Buddhist point of view, the main thing that you can give is friendship. You can always be a friend of someone. You can't always be happy. That's inhuman. Life is such that it's not possible to always be happy. And if you're not happy, it doesn't mean to say there's necessarily something wrong. You can't always be happy. It's not appropriate always to be happy. Sometimes people are happy at you. Have you ever had that? They don't seem to include you in their happiness. They're just sort of happy at you. You feel that you're being called upon to applaud it rather than share it. You can't always be happy, but you can be friendly and you can make friends. You can take an interest in people. You can always do that. I can always do that. Whatever state of mind I'm in, actually I can always say, "How are you?" and take an interest in someone. Yeah. Every time we do that, even in those little small ways, we stretch ourselves beyond ourselves. Every time we can find ourselves saying, anyway, how are you doing? Or would you like a cup of tea? Or can I help? Anytime you do that genuinely, you stretch your mind somewhat beyond yourself. The thing is, nowadays we don't often live in small communities. So, increasingly, you can live a thoroughly selfish life online, at home. Nothing asks for us more and more in contemporary life to stretch beyond ourselves, to notice others, to pay attention to others. And so it can mean that we just get more and more egotistical, more and more compacted, more and more self-triumphant and so on. So Buddhism would keep wanting to say, the Buddha would keep wanting to say, never mind about wisdom for a moment. How about you admit that you're in a bad mood at the moment? How about you apologise for that at the moment? How about you give a bit of your time? And how about you make friends? And then we'll come back to wisdom. We'll come back to wisdom. But let's just imagine that we have been doing all that, and in a way you never finish that. So if you never finish that, there's no reason not to bring in wisdom right from the start, because you're always going to be doing that. I'm always going to be doing that. I still have a lot to learn in those very apparently basic things of being aware of people, giving to people, taking ownership of my states of mind, not letting them seep out and blamed onto other people and so on. I've got a lot to learn myself. It's not done, nowhere near done. So once we're doing that and starting to do that, we need to reflect on the nature of reality. For me, I find this more and more of a motivation. I don't really want to just be integrated and take ownership of my life and be positive on itself. I've never seen the point of that. I would have liked to see the point of it, but I didn't. I remember going to this happiness project where they were giving you all these different ways to be happy. It sounds like a big, they were quite good, things like go exercise, or quite goodly things, that 10 things to be happy. And I just thought, but why would you want to do it? What would motivate you to just be happy like that? For me, I don't know about you, I need something much bigger than that. I can't just do goodly things. I don't want to. I've got a sort of allergy to feeling that I'm being improved, especially by other people. I hate when people try and improve me. I need improving, but I won't let anyone do it. Unless they're very good friends, and some of my very good friends are only keen to improve me. That's another thing. Yeah. I can't remember what. I'm just rambling on. Anyway, so we then need to sort of practice these wisdom reflections so that we can find a deeper motivation. I don't think being happy is a motivation. I don't think, for me anyway, not even being a good person is a motivation. I'm not very interested in being a good person. What I'm interested in being is really alive and really have a feeling that my life adds up to something, and that life itself adds up to something, and that life itself is deeply fascinating. That's what I'm into. When I think that life itself, other people, the world, is endlessly fascinating, mysterious, difficult, soul-making, that's what I'm into. I don't want to be a sort of goodly person. I've never been interested in that, and I think you have to be quite careful that you end up as a goodly person. So often that just means a limitation of your energies. So the wisdom reflections that we've been taking people into are reflecting on impermanence, not because that's a nature reality, remember, but because that's a weak spot in reality as we perceive it. The Buddha isn't making any metaphysical statements about reality. He's just saying, if you look at the fact that all your experience is impermanent, constantly changing, a constant patterning of change without the word change in it, if you look at that element of your experience more and more deeply, a new kind of consciousness will arise from that. Yeah? So the Buddha isn't saying all things are impermanent as a kind of metaphysical statement about the universe and everything. He's just saying, that's a really important place to look. Yeah, keep on tuning into the fact that everything is inconstant. Everything is inconstant. Yeah, the more you tune into that, the more you directly feel and know the inconstancy of all things. It's not that you then kind of know that in some kind of intellectual sense and you sort of settle with that, oh, things are inconstant and I'm sort of like a sort of stoical thing. That's not Buddhism at all. It's more that as you get closer to that truth, a new reality, which is experienced always as a relief and a release, that's what you're always looking for in these wisdom reflections. You're not looking for a kind of stoic endurance. You're looking for this sense of relief and release, that there's something else, but you can't ever say what that is. So you reflect on impermanence so that you see through it into something that you can't really talk about. Yeah? It's not so that you end up with a stoical acceptance of impermanence. That's not Buddhism. Then you reflect on the fact that all things are dukkha. All things are usually translated as unsatisfactory. There's no single translation for that, really. I quite like incomplete. That you feel always a bit incomplete. That every experience you have feels slightly like it hasn't quite really deeply touched you. Do you know that sense that you can never bite life to its core? That something is always evades you, slightly dreamlike. Even things that feel very vivid, you feel like you've not quite had them. You've never been able to bite life to its core. Yeah? That's what dukkha means. That it feels incomplete. Doesn't quite do it. Doesn't quite get there. However much you wish it would. And then we've been reflecting, or rather you've been reflecting because I was away on retreat, reflecting on shunyata, on anatta. That there's no independently fixed self. Yeah? It's interesting this because sometimes the Buddha taught that very much and sometimes he didn't. So sometimes he said that there's no fixed inherent self, and sometimes he said, well, just take up a self and create metta, feel loving kindness for all beings. So again, even things like that seem metaphysical statements, there is no fixed self, there's no self, he's using that as a means to discover something beyond any category, self, no self, time, space, any category at all, any way of knowing. So the Buddha's teaching is always saying, just take this up, something can happen from that if you give it enough attention. And then he'll say, okay, we've done that. Now we're just going to say, let's cultivate loving kindness for all beings, which is therefore assuming that there are such a thing and that you're one that can create it. And he's doing that for methodological reasons, except for that sounds too cool. He's doing that because that's another way of approaching reality. If you were to love all beings, any sense of separation between you and all beings would dissolve if you really could love all beings. So he says, well, let's take it up that way now. And then let's take it up this way. But he doesn't say anything really about how things actually are, because nothing can be said about how things actually are. You can experience it, but you can't hammer it out with words, even Buddhist words like self or no self, metta, and so on. They're gateways taken up rightly, in which you can for yourself experience the nature of reality, which is ineluctable and indescribable, beyond words and concepts. But that's what we've been trying to introduce, these wisdom reflections. And the main place at the moment I would suggest that you take up those reflections is on retreat. Because on retreat, it's really, really palpable, isn't it? The sense that your mind becomes more integrated, you take more ownership of your life, you sort of feel in your life more vividly and fully, you know who you are, you're living from your own internal agency, you're not just a puppet of the media, and so on. You're deepening that through meditation. your experience becomes warmer and more pliable and more loving. So you're sort of radiating in meditation, in metta. And then you can very usefully then think, let me just bring into that pliable, integrated, radiating state, a reflection on one of these reflections. What's interesting about these reflections is that they can, in my experience, that they can enhance those integrated, radiating states. When I was on this retreat, I was meditating quite a lot on impermanence. Again, as an insight, as a wisdom reflection. But actually what I ended up with, it was more of that wonderful, radiating, very still, deeply interested and involved state. That felt good enough, frankly. I was very, very pleased to be experiencing it. Don't want to diss it. Very beautiful, actually. So, how Bhante Sangharakshita has talked about that, the word Bhante, we keep using this word, just means reverend teacher. It's a term of respect, and it's usually for your teacher. And Bhante Sangharakshita is the teacher of the Tree Ratna Buddhist order. He terms those reflections and everything that goes in that direction of reflecting on reality, he terms that spiritual death practices. He interestingly translates this word shunyata, which is often nearly always translated as emptiness. He said a much better translation is death. Yeah? You can feel it immediately. It's a bit tougher. You got emptiness, the open dimension of being. Mystery is another translation. He said it's best translated as death, by which he means the death of egotism. Yeah? That you no longer view experience from a point of view of a fixed, stable, enduring self, that you would then try to range the universe around and compare it to you. Some people, that's what we all do, isn't it? We place ourselves at the centre of the universe, we range the universe around it, and then are preoccupied by comparisons. This person seems better than me, that person's worse, that person's about the same, that's the thing I like, that thing I don't like. So we're constantly in this very uncomfortable place of putting ourselves right at the heart of life and then trying to arrange the whole of the universe to suit us, And it's a doom to failure. Doomed to failure. But that is what we human beings are always doing. Nothing to feel bad about it. It's just our situation. We're trying to make it work, this universe, around a central point, an unchanged central point, which we've decided is me. And every one of us has decided it's me. Completely natural, but utterly fruitless, I'm afraid. So we're trying to reflect on these practices to be liberated from that very painful preoccupation with myself and preoccupation with comparing myself to everything around me, to ranging the world around me in a way that suits me, which is endless and terribly debilitating and frustrating. And I know because I do it, and you know because you do it. Yeah. Interesting, when you start to have flashes of either samadhi or wisdom, that's why it's such a relief. Any touch of it feels, and it can be tiny. I remember in my meditation just last week, I just got a bit closer to impermanence, and I could feel it, and it's often experienced physically, I think. Your body just, it sort of opens up a bit like a flower. It's like you hadn't realised how twisted up you are into being the centre of the universe. And when just for a tiny bit you uncenter yourself, your body sort of opens out again. And your mind opens out again, like one of those Chinese flowers in water opens out into a new pattern. And then you go, and then you go, it's gone again. down, okay. That's what happens. That's really nice, and then you're back into nice person at the centre of the universe. It's me again. Hi. Terribly painful. What we've been reflecting on, therefore, are these spiritual death practices. Yeah? Actually, there's many, many more. Apologising when you've been in the wrong is a spiritual death practice. When you say, "I'm sorry, that was my fault." I remember Subhadra and I once had a little row. We had a row about 25 years ago as well, but that's another matter. We had won't go into that one. I lost. We had a little row on the retreat. I was trying to do something, build this daft thing. In a shrine, actually. So Bhadramati very gently came in to try and speak to me, and I said, I can't speak! I'm on retreat, I'm trying to build this thing. And I felt, I was harsh, and I immediately felt regretful, and I remember going up then thinking, still trying to carry on with that narrative of Hariticus, I can't possibly be disturbed now, can't you see? You can do all the rest of the narrative yourself. And then I thought, this isn't working, this is not good. So I went up to Samadhi and said, I'm really sorry, it was my fault. I think I said that. And then we've been friends again ever since. It's that easy, folks. Well, it is with Subhadramati. Other people are a bit more tricky, frankly. So that's a spiritual death practice, because when you're in that kind of state of indignation and, can't they see how busy I am, etc. The instinct is so much to defend your own position. Yeah. So you have to die a bit to say, actually, sorry about that. That wasn't very good. And what was it you're trying to say? And yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's right. You have to die a bit to do that. You don't have to die a bit to apologise. You have to die a bit to confess. You have to die a bit to admit you were wrong. To admit your shortcomings and so on. And we need to learn to die like that on a very regular basis. We human beings, we're bound to get things wrong, we're bound to make mistakes, and frankly, we're bound to act like a chump. I've used a nice old-fashioned English word, like a chump, but all of us do it. And the grown-up thing to do is say, sorry about that, I was being a chump. Look it up. From the Latin, chumpus. No, from the old Greek, to be a Burke. Anyway, so we've been doing all that so that this new consciousness comes up, opens up. So this spiritual death is not the end, you see. And if we think of it as the end, well, it doesn't sound a very good end, does it? For a start of, but it's not the end, because when you die to yourself, something opens up. That Chinese flower opens up. Your mind, your body, it's not just your mind, something in your brain somewhere. Your mind and your body are kind of two parts of the same thing. So your experience, body, soul, mind, heart, all open up. It's a relief and a release. And you feel, even just for an instant, like a weight has been taken off you. And usually you then put it straight back on again, because you think that was nice. But if you can open to that, a new consciousness arises. And Bhante Sangha actually calls that spiritual rebirth. Not a great term, because it sounds weirdly evangelical, spiritual rebirth. Anyway, that'll have to do for now, but anyway, that's the term he used, spiritual rebirth. It means that a new way of being, a wholly new way of being, in other words, it means that there's a way of being in the world, almost unimaginable to us, which is not predicated on an ego, which is not the living out of egotism. Now, it's only almost unimaginable to us because sometimes for tiny moments we do it. Every moment we apologise, every moment we manage to be objective rather than reactive, every moment we manage to help, or like on the door knocking, you manage to not take offence because someone doesn't want to see you, you do get a tiny, tiny glimpse of, golly, there's a new way of being in the world, yeah? Tiny glimpse sometimes. There's a new way of being in the world which, as soon as you try and say anything about it, you've lost it. But we all glimpse it from time to time, sometimes very, very slightly. It reaches all the way down into our life, very slightly. When you touch it, it's the meaning of life itself. It's what you really want. So we can't do much about it apart from do the previous stages. We need to do integration, positive emotion, spiritual death. We need to keep on starting again, integration, taking ownership, all of that again and again and again. We can't, in a way, overtly do much about spiritual rebirth. The one area, actually, as soon as I say one, I can think of another one, but we'll leave that for now. The one area for tonight I want to explore is beauty. Beauty is the precursor to how you experience. I haven't thought this through enough, have I? But how you experience spiritual rebirth is aesthetic, primarily. Yeah. I had it just the other day. I was walking in twilight. You sometimes you've got a bit of time in twilight, and you're not preoccupied with something negative. You're not pontificating in your mind or looking at your phone. Sometimes you can just feel this sense of being like a ghost moving around the world and looking at people better, more kindly. You start to feel a bit of a touch of it being beautiful. The evening coming on, the rain, the people, the lights. Suddenly it starts to feel beautiful, slightly beautiful, in a very ordinary way, but slightly beautiful. And you feel it physically. It's not just you look at it. You feel in touch with something beautiful, almost as if you have a sense of the whole place. Yeah? So probably the best way to have a sense of spiritual rebirth is any touch of beauty in your life. Now, traditionally, when we say beauty, we mean the unification of pleasure and meaning. I think St. Thomas Aquinas, he said that the word beauty just means I can't say anything else. So if you say to someone, look at that beautiful landscape, and they say, what do you mean? You haven't got anything else. As soon as you can't explain beauty, the word beauty means nothing else can be said. That's beautiful. And if someone says why, you can't say anything else. The word beauty marks the end of language. It says you have to get what you mean by it. Even that word, as soon as you say that word beauty, you have to get what you mean by it. And saying it's the unification of pleasure and meaning is a good bit of interesting, but it doesn't really get it. And beauty is always potentially present in life, isn't it? Sometimes in the most unpropitious conditions you can experience beauty. But I just thought I'd just talk about 3 examples of beauty, and then otherwise we'll go on forever. And then we'll meditate for a little bit. The first one was the first 2 are really about the arts, because one of the reasons why Bhante Sangharakshara really encourages the art is because of this thing of beauty, of the nature of beauty, and that beauty, if it's engaged with properly, as it were, but by properly I mean on the basis of spiritual death, positive emotion and integration, in other words, not as some kind of arty-farty kind of me thing, which you can get into with beauty as well. If you approach it in that kind of human way, not in that kind of self-aggrandizing way, it has within it a shimmer of spiritual rebirth. Yeah? So the first one was, got back from my retreat, I went to the cinema. So I went to see The Shape of Water. If you haven't gone and seen it, run out and see it now. Absolutely indispensable viewing. I thought, actually, I was watching it, I thought, sometimes when you're watching a film, you just think, this is wonderful. This is just wonderful. I had to close my eyes in the violent bits, but it's absolutely wonderful. It's visually beautiful. It could never have been made apart from now, because it's so much about 100 years of cinema on one hand. It's also, I think it's a sort of mixture between a sort of fairy tale and a nightmare, and does genuine justice to both. It's also to do with energy, and the monster. It's about a monster, and what is a monster. Anyway, I won't go on about it because there's so much to say about it in a way, but particularly struck that parable about your energies. If you're not, it's also a lot about otherness in it, and fear of otherness, and welcoming otherness. And golly, if we're going to move into spiritual life, if that term means anything, we need to practice this welcoming of otherness, because as you let go of self, everything is other, including yourself. And the film's very much about somebody who'll move towards otherness and embrace it, and out of that comes a God, effectively. Wonderful film. I'd like to give a whole talk on the film. But again, I was struck by its beauty, and again, that beauty felt both literally. It's ravishingly beautiful to look at. Incredible colour. Beautifully composed, like painting. But deeply meaningful, I thought, on lots of different levels. And when we say something is meaningful, it usually means it has lots of different meanings at different levels. Meaningful about cinema, meaningful about the nature of fairy tale, meaningful about the nature of life, not at all ironic and clever. A fully grown-up piece of work, I thought. Quite remarkable. I think I thought it was absolutely wonderful. But I remember sitting there feeling, golly, I didn't know I needed this. I really need this just now. I'd just been on the street, so I was in a good place to watch it. And I felt like the director had rent and shook hands with me, I felt like saying, thanks ever so much for doing that. I was in a kind of ecstasy by the end. I just thought it was wonderful. And then you come out of the cinema and the world is a bit more like the film, glittery and potential of beauty. But what struck me about it again is the sense of beauty is a sense of, oh, I really need this. You have to end up with these poetic words like soul, like my soul needs it. What's interesting about the film is intellectually fascinating, emotionally engaging. Your soul drinks it in, to use that poetic term. It feels like, oh, I so needed this. So that was one example of beauty. Beauty is probably best to give stories about rather than to examine. The other one, I always tell this one about Jan of Archer and I going to see the Meistersingers by Wagner. I'm a big Wagner fan. I remember one of the first opera I listened to was Tristan and Isolde. Somebody told me if you want to listen to classical, I've never listened to classical music much before. I'd played the trombone in my youth, but that's another story. Do come back to me if you want to talk about that. I remember listening to Tristan and Isolde, and it just sounded like a woman screaming, and then a man yelling, and then they seemed to yell and scream at each other, and it went on for 6 hours. Anyway, that's how I first experienced it. Anyway, we went to see them, and the Meistersingers I don't know at all. It's one of Wagner's main operas I don't know at all, actually. And Jan of Archer had got cheap tickets, so off we went, and I usually listen to the music first, but I hadn't even heard the music. And we got there, we were really looking forward to it, because both of us are keen on Wagner. I'm very keen on Wagner. Jan of Archer, yeah, you're very keen on Wagner. In a good mood. The first act came along, we both of us thought it was rubbish. It was like really weird. For a starter, it's a comedy, and if you know anything about Wagner, like it was a really bad choice for Wagner to try and write a comedy. It's a comedy, and it's like not funny. And you're sort of sitting there thinking, okay, I didn't expect him to write this. But it was really interesting because I didn't know the music. Actually, I'm sure the music is much better than that, but it seemed, frankly, to me, awful. On first listening, I just thought this is awful. And then we came out, just like, have we come into the wrong place? This is like a mistake. This is Richard Wagner, not like his brother or something who composed it. No, it's David Wagner. Oh, I see. That explains it. Anyway, Act 2 was a bit better, but not a lot better. And by this time, we were like, this is like really weird. It's supposed to be, the Meistersingers is supposed to be one of his greatest operas, and many people think it's the most musical opera that he wrote. And I really wasn't getting it, And we still had quite a few hours to go. He's always long, Wagner. Anyway, you then have supper break, and we were both of us talking, saying, is there some mistake? Am I not getting it? I'm sure people are right, but it just seems like rubbish. Like laughable. Anyway, except for not funny. Then the third act starts. I think it's the third act that starts. As soon as the third act music started, it's got this. Immediately the music started. Oh, I could feel again, you always have to look into your full experience, not some sort of idea you have about what you like. Suddenly this music sort of grasped me. You can immediately, the third act starts, you're in this completely deeper place. And anyway, that I won't go on about too, but there's this, then later on in the third act, there's this quintet. I think it's a quintet, quartet or quintet. And it's about the song, it's about the Meister song, the Meister sing is about the Meister song. And in this production, which was wonderful, and in the opera, he's literally making the song up. He says, here's the first verse, and he sings it. And he writes the words down on a piece of paper. And in this production, they pin the paper, which is the song, the Meister song, to this sort of clothesline thing, because he's writing it, and the ink is wet, and he puts it on. And then he sings another verse, and these verses are like beautiful. You've had this kind of first two acts, which just seems like bonkers and sort of like silly about all, sort of very parochial life. Then you have this song, which is like, oh my God, it's staggering. He says, this is the first one. He sings it, and you think, and you can feel the whole atmosphere kind of rise up to this song, this gorgeous song. Just one verse, and then it just stops, and they chat for a bit. Except for the singing. And then he says, the next verse is this, and he sings, everyone goes, and then they chat for a bit. And then he puts this thing on the line, and they sing this quintet. And as they were singing the quintet, the piece of paper goes up into the sky. And the whole of the set gets darker and darker, and until there's just this one piece of paper, which you see is the art object. It's the song. What you end up with is this dark stage, 5 singers, and in this production they're just sitting down, and this white square going up until it's like this bright white square above, and this incredible music of this quintet. And I just sat there and wept. I wept and wept. I actually thought I was going to disturb them. I just sat there and wept and wept. And I often find that when I'm very, very deeply moved by beauty. It's very rare, but I just wept and wept and wept. It was so beautiful and so meaningful. I just streamed with tears, and even in that moment I thought, why do I weep like this? And it's like I weep from the deepest possible place, and it's something to do with feeling that I'd forgotten this. This is it. This is life. This is what I'd always meant. I'd just forgotten it. It feels like it had always been there, this beauty, and I'd been alienated from it, estranged from it, and had known it somehow, had felt its absence, but not consciously, not cognitively. That core to life that I never felt I got to, this is the core of life. And I sort of knew it, but I'd forgotten it. And when I weep because I've remembered again. That's how it felt in that moment, that I was weeping because I'd lived estranged from beauty, and that there was no reason to do that. A white piece of paper and this song just could remind me that that the heart of life is this kind of transcendent beauty, and that there was no reason to be estranged from that. And I'd forgotten it. And I just sort of wept for its absence, and wept for the fact that now I could feel its absence, because now it wasn't absent. I don't know whether I've kind of got it across. And it was particularly staggering because of the early acts. And actually, weirdly and incredibly, just shows you what an art object it is, it makes sense of everything that you've seen. You thought it was all a bit chaotic and trivial, actually. But what Wagner manages to do is say, no, there's nothing trivial about us. There is always, shot through all these people that you've laughed at and thought were small-minded, is this incredible beauty, and now I'm going to show it you. Really an incredible human achievement. Yes, and I felt that I was weeping for its absence, because there it was present in my life. Yeah? And then, of course, that takes me to when you're ordained in the Triratna Buddhist order, you take on what's called a sadhana practice, is where you visualize either the Buddha or a hypostasis of the Buddha, emanation of the Buddha, a figure like Green Tara, a female green figure of Green Tara. It might be Amitabha, it might be Padmasambhava, Manjughosha, a whole kind of array of figures evoking that white square of paper, that transcendent beauty. And you meditate on them so as to experience directly this spiritual rebirth, this new consciousness. And again, primary thing about those sadhana practices you're given when you're ordained is that they're beautiful. That the figures are, that you don't see them as solid figures, you see them as figures made of light, coloured light. And they appear to you, and they always say, they appear to you well pleased. They appear, and their whole awareness is on you, and they are well pleased with you. And their light of the most transcendent nature floods from them into you. Yeah? And you, by dwelling upon them, you become them. That's always the law, isn't it? That whatever you dwell upon, that's what you become. If you dwell upon loss, you become a person concerned with loss. If you dwell upon beauty, etc. So at ordination, that's what you're given in our system, so as to experience spiritual rebirth, which again then becomes a motivation to take ownership of your life, to give, to practice spiritual death, and then to experience spiritual rebirth again, which gives you motivation to start again and again. So I just wanted to just try to impressionistically sort of bring the whole thing to that circle of integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and then out of that arises spontaneous, compassionate activity. All you can do, if you lived in that spiritual rebirth, would be to be a force for good in the world. You would be like that lit square in the universe, shining for everyone. Yeah. So let's finish by closing our eyes and see if we can evoke that in our own heart.